Hi, I'm Molly.
And I'm Jamie, and this is our From the Pasture with Hired Hand podcast. As the owners of Hired Hand website software, we've been developing websites and creating internet marketing strategies for livestock breeders for the past 10 years.
The majority of our customers are involved in the breeding of registered animals, such as Texas Longhorns, Highland cattle, horses, and white-tailed deer, where the pedigrees are very important. The From the Pasture with Hired Hand podcast examines many of the differences in raising pedigreed livestock for maximum profit. Join us and learn what we're covering today.
Hi, everyone. Today I'm here with Matt Bourbon, and he has a website with us called Bourbon Brothers Livestock. So thanks for joining us today, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and start by just telling everyone a little bit about yourself and about your breeding program.
Okay. We are located in Northeast Ohio in a small town, mostly of an Amish community up here, called Garrettsville. We run a small herd, anywhere averaging, I'd say between 7 and 12 head, depending on the time of year. Due to Ohio winters, we try not to get too crazy, especially with the cost of hay and feed and ground. So we try our best to have multiple different family lines and genetics, and I don't specifically focus on one line or one, different trait. We try to breed for the total package when it comes to these animals. And so if we find cattle that are based out of California or the East Coast over here by us or down to Texas, we just bring them here and try to acclimate them to the Ohio climate and do the best we can to make the total package animal that our program is striving to achieve.
Nice. So you said you're up here. I don't think you actually mentioned the city and state where you're located, though. Can you share that with the listeners?
Oh, yep. So we're in Garrettsville, Ohio. We're about 40 minutes southeast of Cleveland, Ohio.
Perfect. So kind of a unique space for Longhorns. We all know, obviously, there's a pretty famous breeder there in Ohio that helps get the word out. But go ahead and tell us just a little bit about why you chose Longhorns, especially being in kind of a different part of the country than what you normally find them.
So it's a funny story. I actually grew up in southeastern Missouri on a commercial beef production farm. And when I moved up here to Ohio, my wife, who didn't come from an agricultural background, asked me, well, what type of cattle are we going to do? And I explained to her, I said, well, I haven't really decided yet. She said, well, if we're doing cows, they need to be unique. And honestly, you're hard pressed to find anything more unique than a Texas Longhorn. So that's kind of how we got started on deciding what route we wanted to go. And then once we kind of started looking into them, I realized that they're not just strictly in Texas, they're nationwide. We have breeders everywhere in the country.
Very true. So I grew up in Iowa, and people always freaked out when they figured out that's the type of cattle we had, whether they were driving by or, when we'd load them up and take them to a show or a sale down south. But it can definitely, your wife was probably onto something. It can definitely work to your advantage to kind of have a unique breed, have it stand out a little bit more. So once you and her made that decision, tell me a little bit about just how you got started. For example, what sort of research did you do? Who did you purchase your first animals from? How did you find those specific ones? Just kind of walk us through that process.
Well, one thing about me when it comes to doing anything, I usually jump in head first. And as far as research went, about 5 minutes on the internet and I was already sold. I was like, well, this is what we're going to do. I have no clue what we're doing, but we'll figure it out. So a Facebook post or two later, we found a local breeder about 100 miles south of us, and we went kind of the backwards route with it. First thing we bought was a yearling bull calf, and then I decided, well, he can't be by himself. So then we started looking around for a couple steers, and in the process of looking for steers, I found some heifers, and we went over to southern Indiana and picked up 2 heifers from a breeder over there. and came back, and next thing you know, 2 turns to 4, 4 turns to 6. And I tell everybody when I got in, I did the quantity over quality deal. The cattle I started with were good quality, but I went out and I bought things that they kept me where I wanted to start out, but not totally where I wanted to be. And the one thing is I went through and I refined the genetics and the herd number that I had. And we sold off our initial probably 7 that we started with. And then we contacted different breeders across the country once I realized exactly where I wanted to go, how I wanted to go about it. And I think as of right now, I've bought cattle out of 12 different states. So what started as a 100-mile trip with my first animal turned into thousands of miles later.
So how much time transpired between when you were, excitedly buying up quantity, like you mentioned, versus when you kind of had to felt the need to revamp and go more towards quality?
I would say about 6 months is kind of, I was looking at heifers that weren't really meeting the benchmark that the industry itself has set. A lot of breeders are looking for heifers that are 60 inches at 2. And I had a 3-year-old heifer coming cow that she might have had 40 inches or 50 inches. And I was like, well, I'm behind the 8 ball, and you see everybody that has these big, massive cows. And I was like, I feel like I was sitting stagnant. So that was when I really started. I reached out to other breeders, a lot of veteran breeders as well, and kind of picked their knowledge. A lot of breeders have made mistakes over the years that they love to share with the younger, newer breeders. And I had we'll call him a young gentleman out of Southern Alabama, told me, he said, if I can take every mistake I've ever made and tell a new breeder about it and save them thousands and thousands of dollars, then I feel like I'm doing them a favor by teaching them now instead of letting them learn on their own.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say now that you've been rolling for a little bit and you have, it sounds like maybe you're a little bit more content for the animals that you have in terms of what your goals are. Tell us a little bit about those goals and kind of the dreams for your breeding program.
So it started in June. I made a trip down to Central Texas, and I visited with John and Christy Randolph along some pines. And I was looking at some pearl snap BCB heifers. And after a 8-hour trip down to John and Christy's on the mule, John asked me, he said, well, why buy the heifers when you can buy the factory? And we got to talking about pearl snap himself. And I had known about him, and I knew everything that he could do and what he had done for the Bolins and the Randolphs. And I said, well, heck, let me think about it. And I flew back to Ohio, and me and the boss lady, as I call her, threw around the idea. And I thought, man, this isn't even going to be possible. But we worked things out, and we actually acquired Pearl Snap BCB back in October at the Millennium Futurity. And we brought him home. And the one goal I have, that bull has been used by some of the top programs and breeders in the country, and he has produced some of the best animals that are utilized by fantastic programs. And the one goal I have is to keep that bull on the level he is, as well as open it up and allow these smaller breeders in a total different part of the country to utilize him. So we have him up here covering our cows and a couple others in the area around. But my goal is to produce an animal outside of, since we've started, out of Pearl Snap to win futurities, because we're 18 months in, and we've participated in 3 or 4 futurities, but we've never won anything. So that's the small goal that I've kind of created for ourselves in our program, is to produce futurity winners, as well as grow those futurity winners into producing cows that can maintain themselves as well as raise a nice calf. And at the same time, keep Pearl Snap on the map and continue to grow him as well.
So for folks visiting your website looking at Pearl Snap, what's the one thing you hope they take away when they view his animal details?
Even as a bull we measured him the other day and he's sitting, I think I'd have to look back, I believe 81 and 3/8. And even as a bull with low 80s in his horn, and he's not a 1-ton bull like some of the industry is hunting for right now, but he can produce futurity winners. And then a lot of people have told me, well, he doesn't have a whole lot of horn. Can he produce it? Well, Wayne and Joanna Manning have a daughter of his that is 90 and, don't quote me, 90 and 5/8, I believe. So, and people have told me with that bull, he clicks with all different types of genetics. There's some animals that click with one certain line, but history's shown with him that he clicks with multiple genetics. And that's the one thing that I hope a lot of people take away from him.
Great. So let's circle back to where you were talking about futurities for a minute, and I'm gonna spring a question on you that we didn't send you on our pre-approved list. For a new breeder or fairly new breeder, it seems that you're very active in futurities. Can you tell me a little bit about how long it took you to kind of figure out that whole system as a new breeder, and what made you decide that you were finally ready to put some animals in and compete and kind of get involved in that part of the industry?
Sure. So the one thing, and I think even some of the veteran breeders will tell you, we might think we have it figured out, but every futurity you go to is different, and the systems are always changing, and the animals and the scores are always evolving. And there's so many judges in this industry that look at different aspects of the animal. I don't think any of us are ever going to have it all figured out. But that's one of the great things about the Longhorn industry is it's constantly evolving. Like I said before, when I find something that I want to do, I kind of jump in head first, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing. The first futurity I ever sat and watched was the 2021 Horn Showcase futurity. And just watching how it was ran and the animals that were competing and overall atmosphere of the breeders themselves, I thought, well, this is a part of the industry I'd love to get involved with. So my first futurity that I competed in, we took a heifer to the Texoma Classic or Spring Classic last March. And she placed middle of the class. And heck, for me being new, I thought I was high on the hog at that point. So we hauled her to the Bluegrass futurity the following weekend. And she was in a class of 37 and she placed real low to the bottom. And I was like, well, she wasn't the last one. So I guess we're doing something right. And then I helped put on the branding iron futurity here in Ohio last year. And that's one thing I learned when it comes to these futurities. It takes a lot of work to put these things on. So whenever you talk to somebody that's running one and you're given suggestions, it's one of those things. These people work all hours of the day to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So my hat goes off to those guys. It's a lot of work to put on a show. And that's one thing that I think a lot of breeders, if you step back and look at the picture, that's something that we got to focus on and thank those guys running the events for us.
Yeah, that's very true. I feel like a lot of times that behind the scenes work definitely goes unnoticed. So that's a great point. So keeping in mind again that you've kind of made a great or a quick turnaround of your herd and really gotten involved. Is there one piece of advice that you would give new breeders that you feel like you've learned and could help them with?
Pick up the phone and call people. Everybody in this industry, I can honestly say I've never called anybody and said, hey, I want to come out and look at cattle. And they've said, oh, nope, sorry. We're not having visitors. Everybody from the smallest guy to the biggest guy is always happy to have you out and showcase their cattle to you. And the veteran breeders, they are more than happy to give you advice. So if you have a gut feeling about a decision you're about to make, call somebody, because everybody's, if you're in a situation, I'd put money on it that one of these veteran breeders, they've been in that same situation and they probably have really good suggestions for you. So don't be scared or intimidated of breeders that have hundreds and hundreds of cattle. I mean, they put their pants on the same way we do, one leg at a time, and they're more than happy to help you out wherever they can at all hours of the day.
That's very true. We're very fortunate to have a very friendly, very kind industry for sure.
Love what you're hearing? Be sure to check out our Pickup Truck Confessions. It's a video series where we hop in the truck or rental car and interview a variety of breeders about what drives their passion for their livestock, how they got started in the breed of their choice, marketing tips, and more. And now, back to the podcast.
You'd previously mentioned John and Christy Randolph as one of the kind of, I would say, more veteran breeders that you bought cattle from. Is there anyone else special that you kind of want to give a shout out for helping you get started or helping you get your herd to where it is today?
Shoot, there's probably a whole list of them. I could go on for hours and keep telling me, hey, we ran out of time. Gail Beach out of Northern Indiana has helped me a tremendous amount as far as kind of being the voice of reason. When I want to do something, I call her and she says, well, I don't really know if that's a good fit. You can do it if you want, but maybe you should look in this direction or that direction. So she's helped me out a tremendous amount. Josh and Kit Dinwiddie out of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I spent an early morning helping Josh feed his heifers, and I looked at a couple bulls with him and a couple cows. And I mean, just the 3 or 4 hours I spent with Josh, I took away a wealth of knowledge as far as where I wanted to go with my program and what to look for and what to avoid. And, if you cross this with that, you'll get something that looks like this. And if you cross that, you might end up with something. And so, and then Nelson Hearn out of Pennsylvania, nail tam Longhorns. Here in the past, I'd say 6 or 8 months, he's really kind of taken me under his wing and handed me a lot of responsibilities going along with their organization and given me an opportunity that has really, I think if it works out, it'll really jumpstart what we're trying to do over here and really take off, hopefully.
That's great. Do you want to talk a little bit about NETLA, just for those folks who might be listening in your part of the country and might not be familiar?
So NETLA is Northeastern Texas Longhorn Association. And it's funny because I've known about them since I got in the industry. But I always thought NETLA was more Northeast than Ohio. So Nelson reached out and contacted me. Well, I met him in person a few times and we exchanged a couple conversations, and he reached out to me and he offered me an opportunity to help put his futurity together for 2023 for the NETLA organization. So we've really been working hard on that. And that's kind of where my speech about all the behind the scenes work comes from, because the past 2 weeks I've spent hours and hours on the phone with breeders from across the country. So they have a big youth following, and we have 2 sons. Lane is 2 and Jeremy is coming 6 in the next week or 2. So one thing that we wanted to find was a group that focused on youth, because when the boys get older, they're going to have something to do to occupy their time. And those boys eat and sleep cattle. So NETLA was a perfect home for us to fall into. So they push youth pretty heavy, as well as their futurity, their haltered events that they put on at the different fairs, as well as a sale. And that's one thing that the northeastern part of the country, we have the Cherry Blossom and East Coast Classic, but to the north, I mean, Virginia is still a 8-hour drive from us. So we found that the community up here really didn't have a big sale, and we have a high Amish population. So NETLA has put together a sale over the past few years, and it's growing. And that gives us an opportunity up here in the far northeast to market our cattle the same way we would in other parts of the country.
That's great. Yeah, I think you all had us down for the first time last year to do or over, I guess, not down, to do the internet bidding, right?
Yes, and as far as I know, you're coming back this year, so
Yeah, yes,
it's
I
June
believe
2nd and June
so.
3rd.
Oh, say that one more time for the listeners. Sorry.
The fraternity is June 2nd and the sale is June 3rd.
Perfect. And the location of that again?
It is at Lebanon Livestock Auction. That's in Lebanon, Pennsylvania.
Well, is there anything else before we switch gears and talk a little bit about your new website? Is there anything else that you want to share with us specifically about the Longhorn breed or the herd that you're building?
Off the top of my head, no. It's one of those things that just, if you have any questions, reach out to somebody, because if you're wondering how to do something, there's people more than willing to help you out. And that's the one thing getting in that I learned, and I'm thankful that I did. So if there's any way I can help anybody, feel free to give me a call. If I don't have the answer, I might be able to connect you with somebody who does.
Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about your website. So what made you finally choose Hired Hand to power your site?
Well, I had reached out to a couple breeders, kind of deciding where to head with my program. One of the folks is Mike and Elizabeth Fritz, and the other one was Greg Cott. I should have put those earlier in there in the list. I had all these cows that I didn't know what breeding to pair with them. And, I mean, what's the value of the cows that I had? I mean, I know what I paid for them, but what's the industry market for them? And people kept asking me. I called probably 6 or 8 people, and they said, "Well, you have a website?" And I said, "No." And they're like, "Well, you need to get one." And I said, I'm not very technologically savvy. I don't know how to make one of those. And they said, "Well, we have somebody. It's called Hired Hand. That's who we use." And I said, "Well, I'll give them a call." And that's when I reached out, and it was the easiest process. When we started the whole deal, I had nothing but an idea. I said I wanted a website for my cows. I didn't know, any of the format, how to go. I had seen thousands of Hired Hand websites, but I didn't know what style I wanted to go with. But when I came to you guys and said, "These are the cows I have, this is the pictures I have, the measurements, the progeny, and here's an about us," that I typed up that sounded bad, and the wife, she critiqued it. So, and I sent it to you guys, and you guys compiled it all, and it came out outstanding. I would have never been able to do that on my own without you guys.
Awesome. And I assume it's Angie that helped you with some of that, right?
Yes. And anytime I had a question, within 5 minutes, I had an answer. I would have something and be like, "Well, how's this sound?" And she'd say, "Oh, that sounds great." And then if I'd send her something that it wasn't the quality it should be, she helped me make it to where it would be the quality it needed to be for a successful website.
So besides some of the, kind of tweaking the content that you and your wife were developing, what other special considerations or decisions did you make when you were working on the website that you feel kind of now makes it stand out, against your competition, or just, puts it together as a really nice presentation of your herd?
You hear it all the time, but a picture speaks tremendous on the cattle you have. And that was the one thing. I grew up with beef cattle, and I might have taken, 100 pictures my entire life of cows that were, you could show somebody and that knew anything about cows, and they'd be like, "Okay." But when it comes to the Longhorn cows, you can take a picture of a cow and she can look great, but the angle or the lighting, you can change the whole image of a cow, size wise, horn direction, just on a picture. So I learned a lot as far as that went. And the pictures I initially started with, and then once you start looking at how some of these folks photograph their cattle, it really showed that my pictures were way below theirs. So you got to move the whole herd to a section of the farm that's got a nice backdrop. You have to get the sun right. They can't be eating hay. It's things like that. If you go out in the field and you try to take 10 pictures of 10 different cows in a 20-minute period, it's never going to happen. You might get lucky and get one. So I learned real quick that the pictures have to be exactly what you want.
How often do you retake photos in a year for for your website updates?
I'd say probably 5 or 6 times a week. I try to get better pictures of the cows.
Oh, wow.
This time of year, not so much. That's the one thing with these cows. They change so much. I mean, especially the young ones. So in this time of year, everything looks like a fur ball running around in Ohio because it's so cold and snowy half the time. So this time of year, not so much. But in the summer, any chance they're in the right spot with the right lighting, I'm trying. Doesn't mean it always works out, but we try.
And do you just prefer to use your iPhone, or do you have a camera that you like to use?
Like I said before, I'm not very technologically savvy quite yet. I use my iPhone, but the wife, she handles the camera.
That seems like a good way to, tag team it though. That way, hopefully at least one of them will turn out, right?
Exactly. And that's the one thing. She'll send me one and the quality of the picture is great, but the backdrop, and I'll tell her, no, we can't use that. There's stuff in the background, a section of fence I don't like, or heck, the neighbor's house. And she says, well, you just need to start using the camera then, because I'm tired of taking great pictures and you don't like them.
Uh-oh.
So, exactly. But no, overall, it's one of those things. It takes time. It takes patience. And if you don't get it today, try again tomorrow. And you get lucky every once in a while. So that's what I try to do.
So I feel like your name itself is pretty unique. I don't know if you get that a lot, and that in turn makes your ranch name a little bit unique. You definitely could have went, for your site design, you could have went full on, whiskey glass and longhorns coming off of it or something like that, but you kept it very, very clean, very classy, kind of a sage green color, of nice clean logo. So you're definitely not tying into your name to stand out at all. How are you trying to stand out a little bit with your website?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I started with Angie working on a website, I think the week of a ranch called On the Rocks came out, and it was I think it's a whiskey glass with a little bit of whiskey in the bottom and some ice cubes with horns coming off of it. And I was like, man, that was my idea I had. Now what do I do? And so when we came up with the final design, I kind of chuckled. I was like, well, it still turned out exactly how I pictured it, but On the Rocks beat me to the punch. So they have a fantastic design on their ranch as well.
Well, hopefully you don't hold it
with
against
websites,
bad
I think
timing, right?
No, I don't hold it against anybody. It's one of those things. If I would have got behind the 8 ball, for say, when I initially wanted to do the website, but I pushed it off, maybe it would go the other way. And that would be the design I would go with. But I waited, and the early bird gets the worm. With websites, I think repetition in this industry is a big thing, because if you're posting these cattle that you have every day and your website links down there in the bottom, and I can look at one picture that somebody posted on Facebook, or I can go to that link and I can look at pictures of that cow when she was a yearling all the way up to a 12-year-old cow. And next thing you know, you're down the rabbit hole and you're in somebody's sale pen looking at cows that are for sale. And well, they have this bull, and I've always wanted a calf out of that cow. So maybe I can call them and get a calf or an embryo out of them. And that's the one thing that we've tried to do since we've gotten the website developed, is every time we post a picture of a cow or a calf or even pearl snap, we put the website link down there, because you never know. Heck, that's how I ended up with some of the cows I bought. I looked at a a calf out of a cow, and I didn't really know much about the cow till I started digging around. And next thing you know, I'm 3 generations back on her pedigree. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that cow had that genetic line in her. And lo and behold, I bought the cow and not even the heifer I was looking at. So if you put it out in front of the people, they're going to see it.
So what social media platforms are you active on? Do you promote your animals just mostly on Facebook? Are you also on Instagram?
I use Facebook quite a bit, and that's primarily where we're at. Steph runs an Instagram with the farm pictures on there. If you look at it, most of the time it's the calves, because that's what she's in it for. She likes the babies, so most of the pictures are the calves. And then you can go to the Facebook and you realize that most of my pictures are of the bulls, because that's what I enjoy as far as the industry goes.
Good balance then, at least, right?
Exactly.
All right, well, last question here, and then we can let you off the hot seat. So we always ask everyone, what is your favorite hired hand website aside from your own?
Shoot, that's a hard one because there's so many to choose from. There's 2 that really stick out to me. One is M7 Longhorns, Wayne and Joanna Manning. One, because they have cattle for days down there, and they're all phenomenal cattle. But 2, the way their website's broken up, they have their bulls, their cows, their calves, heifers. They have a herd sire prospect section, and they have a black and white herd section. And that's one thing that is really hot right now with the color scheme in the industry. So somebody that's looking strictly for black and white cattle, which it happens all the time, that gives them an avenue to just go straight to that section of cows. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with a solid red cow. Heck, I got 4 of them right now. But when it comes to looking for certain things, a website set up like that really helps out for, the producer themselves as well as the consumers. And they keep theirs extremely updated as far as measurements, progeny, if they buy animals or they sell animals, the prices are on there. It's a well-ran site, as well as the design concept of it as well. The other one is Lazy J Longhorns, which is Joe and Stephanie Sedlacek, because Joe does the true black. So he's got a whole section on his website that are of cattle that are alive, that are dead and gone, that he's owned and that other people own. And he keeps track of the measurements of those black and white cows and bulls and steers as well. And that's one impressive thing. And that goes with a website. He's got a whole section that it benefits the whole industry, as well as he has the Joe shoot section. So that's a whole nother concept that he's added in there. So that's another well-ran website that really sticks out in my head.
Those are 2 really great and really different examples. So that's interesting to hear that you enjoy them both for, definitely for different reasons. So very interesting. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up here today?
No, it's an honor and a privilege to be on the podcast, and I appreciate everything that Hired Hand as well as other breeders across the industry have done for us. And if you're ever in Northeast Ohio, which it's not really a vacation destination, but if you're ever in this part of the country and want to come by and see some cows, let me know. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Matt. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having us. We appreciate the opportunity.